Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Red Ladder, which bills itself as Britain's leading radical theatre company, this year celebrates its 50th anniversary, tracing its roots back to the left-wing agitprop theatre of the 1960s. To celebrate, instead of its usual fare of new political writing, it has turned to Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children, which artistic director Rod Dixon has staged as a promenade production in a warehouse in Leeds. I spoke to Rod when the production had been running for nearly a week and asked him to explain how they came to be doing this particular show.
With 2018 being Red Ladder's 50th anniversary, I knew I wanted to do something out of the ordinary, spectacular, larger in scale than we can normally do because we're a touring company. And we just had a very successful run of The Damned United as a co-production in the Courtyard Theatre at what was the West Yorkshire Playhouse, is now the Leeds Playhouse. So I straight away went to James Brining and said, well, look, we just sold out the Courtyard. I reckon we can have a go at the Quarry next, which is the larger stage. And he said, oh, yeah, well, yeah, you know, sort of umming and ahhing. What would you do? And I said, well, something massive like Mother Courage. And he went, brilliant, brilliant. One slight snag, we're being refurbed all the way through 2018, so we haven't got the Quarry stage. And then I went away and thought about it and said, well, actually, I think Mother Courage is virtually unstageable on a theatre stage. It needs to be in a warehouse or, you know, in a found space. And I've always thought, well, why don't people do that? They often do it in a traverse. In fact, I've directed it before in the traverse. And I came to the end of that production thinking I'd hardly scratched the surface of it. It's such an amazing play. So I thought, no, I think it all makes sense for it to be a promenade piece. And then, of course, I thought about it deeper. And I thought, of course, it's about displacement, it's about migration, it's about the effect on the civilian population of war. And with it being the centenary of the end of the First World War, there's quite a lot of plays about the First World War. There's quite a lot of plays about suffragettes. There's, you know, everybody seems to be focusing back on those kind of things. And I thought, no, actually, all our work is about the struggle for ordinary people to survive in many ways, you know, be it against the miners' strike or against the pressures of modern capitalism. And I just thought, actually, this is the way we should go. We should look at it as a piece of work that involves the audience somehow and makes them feel part of it. And then I heard an absolutely fascinating and brilliant podcast with Adam Buxton and a young Syrian man talking about his illegal entry into this country, fleeing from Syria. And it was really fascinating because there have been front page headlines on all the tabloid newspapers, sorry, not all the tabloid newspapers, but a lot of the tabloid newspapers over the last 5 years that have been frankly xenophobic, if anything racist, you know, implying that we are being overrun with foreigners and that people who get into rubber boats, I mean, I think Katie Hopkins described them as cockroaches, which is, I know she's probably not as stupid as she plays. I think she's a sensationalist and she loves to stir it up. But I actually think her politics are probably close to fascism. So I wanted to counter that narrative because you meet perfectly intelligent people, you know, graduates, undergraduates who come out with appalling things like, well, why have they got smartphones, these refugees? And you scratch your head and go, well, they do have the internet in Syria. You know, until the troubles in Syria, they were probably watching EastEnders on Netflix. You know, it's a modern city, just that when you look at it on the news now, it's been completely reduced to medieval rubble. And I thought, well, the best way to counter that simplistic xenophobic thinking is to make people imagine, or perhaps suggest people imagine, what it would be like if the bombs were raining down on Leeds and this glossy capitalist city was reduced to, you know, medieval rubble, and how we would cope and where we would go and and yes, we would pack what bags we could and we would just get out anywhere. Somebody said to me, well, why do they always come to our country? And it's like, well, they have no idea which country they're coming to. That I have a very good Kurdish friend who's a poet, and he said he fell out of a lorry late at night in Liverpool and didn't know what language he was being spoken to, let alone English, and had no idea where he was. He had a vague idea it was the UK, but these people were speaking with such a strange accent in Liverpool that he had no idea where he was. And it was obviously must be terrifying. So I kind of wanted to attempt to recreate that experience. We had a young student on Tuesday night this week, a new sixth former, barely 16, 17, who had a bit of a panic attack on one of the transitions and had to be calmed down a bit. And when she sort of gathered herself and we were with her teacher, we were able to talk to her, and she said, "Oh, this is brilliant, this production, but I just got really scared. I just didn't know where I was." And that's exactly what it must feel like to step out of a rubber boat, having survived, a sinking journey across the Mediterranean, and to land at some shores, Greece, Lesbos, Sicily, God knows where you are, but at least you're on dry land, and then the journey starts. So that's the story. Now, Mother Courage as a play doesn't necessarily investigate that story, but it's the experience that those civilians are going through, particularly young women going across the African continent facing, attacks and rape and horrors of the masculine world. It's exactly what happens to Catherine and has happened to her several times, which is the brief explanation of why she's mute. So I thought Mother Courage, and then I thought, well, who's a friend of the company who understands our politics? I'm not saying that we're raving lefties, but I think it helps to have an actor who shares our worldview. Essentially, the worldview being that this capitalist system is totally broken and nobody knows what on earth to replace it with. I think that's received opinion amongst the left anyway. So who could take on this massive role? And the first person that came to mind was Pauline McLynn, because we had met and we had meetings, and I hadn't been able to offer her a job. There wasn't a role that was right for her, but we were acquaintances. And we also know Maxine Peake, but she's not really a friend of the company fully yet. We know her through friends. And Judy Hesmanholz, actually, we also know and has been to see our shows, and I think she likes our work, but she's actually been offered the role at the Royal Exchange in February. Yeah. But Pauline, for me, sorry to say this on a podcast, but she was way ahead in the pecking order for anybody for me, because of her Irishness, because of her ability to play hard, shall we say, almost traumatized women. She's most famous for Mrs. Doyle. Yeah. And I'll come back to that as well. I think that's an apt choice for this play anyway. There's something very grotesque about Mrs. Doyle, and there's something very grotesque about Mother Courage as well. I had seen other famous actors play the role, and there had been a temptation for them to reveal a feminine weakness. And I felt that wasn't in the play. I felt that was actors playing, shall we say, the Stanislavskian approach to this piece. And what I see is my relative. Well, I have distant relatives who are Irish, and I know Irish travellers, and I've seen Irish traveller women, and they're hard as nails, and their lives are tough, and they're traumatized by what they do and how they live, and their struggle to survive is one of trauma. So I thought, no, Mother Courage has to have the potential to, when she pulls a knife out on the soldier, she has to have the potential to stab him to death. I don't want this mother word to get in the way of the fact that when you are traumatized by war, by extreme circumstances, and by horrors that you've seen, you inevitably lose some humanity. It's post-traumatic stress disorder is what you would call it nowadays. And I think that's what she suffers. I think that's what all the characters suffer in any play about war. My own father fought in the Second World War and was scarred, and all his generation were. And, people just say, oh, step upper lip, I can't speak, it's funny, and get on with it. But actually, there was no psychological support for those guys. And there's very little for people who come out of modern warfare either. A high percentage of alcoholics who are living on the streets are ex-squaddies. So that was the role. Pauline met with me and without a hesitation said, God, I can't say no to this. This is the King Lear of roles for women. And, a woman my age doesn't get many chances to take hold of it. Yes, please, yes, please. Of course, her agent was a bit more nervous about it because we're not the Globe, We're not a big building. We have Leeds Playhouse very much supporting us, but it's not a co-production. It's just Ickle Red Ladder. And, but, we're 50, and so she's gone, it's a special occasion as well. She totally gets it. And so nerve-wracking 18 months to 2 years of waiting for that contract to actually be signed because she had a TV commitment in Australia, which is why we started later than we wanted to. We would have started in August in this space, but we're now going into, 20th of October when this warehouse will become pretty unpleasant and cold. But in a way, that's kind of part of it. We want the audience to have fairly miserable experience. And some have said, yeah, it's grim, it's miserable, and I've stood up for 3 hours, but I've absolutely loved what you've done with it. I really understand this play. So yeah, Pauline, and we had a couple of days back in May before she went to Australia. We worked together on the script and we walked around the space, and she said some really brave things that confirmed to me that she was absolutely right for the role. She said, I don't care what the critics want from me. I'm going to give a monster. She's a monster. I'm not saying that she's a monster that you don't empathize with, but she has lost a soul. She's soulless. She actually says that in the play. I don't have a soul. So how do you play somebody without a soul subtly, without playing, a ridiculous over-the-top devil or a harridan? And she does it. She does it in her face when the soldiers come with the body of her son, Swiss Cheese, and ask her to identify him. She can't look at the body. And she just grits her teeth, and you can see the jaw muscles go. And that, for me, my reading of that, I have to ask the audience, but my reading of that is, of course she's in pain. Of course she's screaming inside. And I think the first production, isn't it, with Helen Weigel, she did a silent scream at that moment. And I think a lot of subsequent directors have felt that they have to do that. And we agreed that we didn't want to show anything. Our Mother Courage does rage and scream, but it's anger. It's not pain. Well, of course it's pain, but it's anger first, Yeah. So, dead exciting to work with her. And obviously, the punters who are old enough to remember Father Ted come thinking, oh, this is going to be interesting. Mrs. Doyle as Mother Courage. And within seconds of her being on stage, they realise she's really not, Mrs. Doyle. Obviously, she's done a lot of telly. She's done EastEnders and Shameless. But she was also in Happy Days at Chef the Crucible in that Samuel Beckett play and was remarkable in that. So, I was over the moon when she said, yeah, of course. And even more over the moon when I brought her to this filthy warehouse, thinking, oh, here we go. She's going to say, where's my dressing room? Where's my shower? Where's my Perrier water? But that's not Pauline at all. She actually said, oh, God, this place is the dogs. Absolutely love it. I can't wait to get on with this. This is an adventure, So, and she does seem to have lost that energy, even though we've been in there a couple of weeks now. And then the task of finding, what translation to do. And I approached Alice Nutter, who is a friend of the company. She's just written a TV series about the Gettys. She's ex-Chumbawamba as well. Alice was really interested, but had just taken on this Gettys series for an American production company, so it was probably too busy. And what she wanted to do, the Brecht estate wouldn't have allowed anyway. She wanted to be really radical and rewrite it. She wanted to give Catherine a voice, and they were absolutely categorically, no. It's hugely ironic, isn't it, that the grandchildren of Bertolt Brecht want to keep him in Aspic, where he would break every rule he possibly could.
And not credit anybody.
There's a lot of women out there, apparently, who feel that they deserve more credit from him, but I don't want to go there. So Alice wasn't available. And then Daniel Bai, Daniel Bai is a theatre maker. He has a PhD in Brecht, and he said, oh, you want to read the Lee Hall? It's brilliant. So I read the Tony Kushner, obviously know the John Willett. I picked up the Lee Hall, and it is remarkable. It's got a northern voice. It's got that wry northern humour, and it races along. Yeah, okay, we're 3 hours as a production, but that's with a big interval in the middle. The 2 halves run at about an hour and 20, something like that, which is bearable, but it doesn't feel like that. It's very funny, but every time it's funny, there is a counter with darkness. And so you find yourself, there's still a trail of laughter and there's horror in front of your eyes. And I think that's genius. I love that. And you see people stifle laughter because they realize they've been laughing at something that's past and now they're into something that is inappropriate to laugh at, which is amazing. So as a translation, it works. And I sent it to Pauline and she absolutely loved it. And it's even got the phrase "go on" in it. So kind of like, if you're looking for a Doyleism, it is in there at least once. So we went with that, and then Boff Worley, who's a long-time collaborator with us. We've worked with him on, I think it's 7 shows. He is he's also probably, you call him the artistic director of Chumbawamba, although they were a collective. I think he basically wrote most of the songs for Chumbawamba, and then the rest of them arranged them with him. So he's a genius of a composer, and I knew that he loves Brecht, so he bit my hand off, and he's composed folky type music which has a Middle Eastern Arabic flavour to it. I was really, really, really hoping that in our community chorus, that we've got a community chorus who help with the audience flow, and they sing the music, and they're backing singers. I desperately went to refugee groups and migrant groups across the city to try and find people who would be able to be in the production. And at least 6 were really into it. 2 Syrian women, an Afghan man, and some Romanians, somebody from Czech Republic, desperately wanted to be in it, sang like angels, but just the commitment was just too big. They have children, they don't have jobs, they're in and out of work, they do shift work, and they just couldn't do it. And I was so disappointed because I wanted some Syrian voices and some foreign language coming across there, being shouted across the space. And that was an ambition. I think I even wrote about that in a blog, and of course it hasn't happened. So I do have a diverse chorus, but I don't think there are any refugees. Oh, actually, there's a guy from Zimbabwe who might be a refugee, but and he sings like an angel. But again, he works in care, so he can't do, every show. So it was an ambition of mine to place the play in. It's a requirement of the Brecht estate that you keep it in the 17th century, in the 30 Years' War. But obviously, we can then colour that with modern sounds and modern songs and modern dress and modern weaponry, if we so wish, to obviously make the obvious point that war hasn't changed ever and never will change, regardless of the technology. It still requires people to be blown to bits.
War is business by other means, I think the line, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's business by any means. And post-Iraq, when Mr. Donald Rumsfeld, he was actually on the board of Lockheed, the other one, Blackwater. I think they're one of the big companies that supplied to the US Army with uniforms and PlayStations and anything else they wanted. He was on the board, and basically between him and Bush, they privatized war even more. They made it more blatant. I think it always was private. Yeah. I don't think they're to blame. I mean, wasn't it ITT that supplied parts for the Nazis in the Second World War, an American company, and then took the American government to court after the war because their factories were bombed, and they won? I don't know whether that's me just making that up. I've read it somewhere. Maybe it's on Wikipedia or something. But, maybe it's a left-wing myth. But war has always been a profit-making venture. So, yes, Boff composed this lovely music. I found, we have several Red Ladder actors who are extremely skilled. Luke Dixon was Brian Clough and it's still Brian Clough because it's still going out on tour in Our Damned United. But he's also a very skilled mask wearer. I'll explain that in a minute. TJ Holmes is an old knee-high acquaintance of mine. He's a brilliant mask wearer and a musician who can play. Well, you'll see him play several instruments in the production. His partner, Becky Barry, is an actor-musician who is I think, the leading BSL integrators in the productions, because she's a hearing artist, but she's an interpreter, and she's passionate about how we make the interpretation come from the stage, not from the side of the stage. And then the actor who I offered Catherine to was given a really nice 9-month contract with another organisation. So I scratched my head and thought, what am I doing? Becky Barry is BSLing for the deaf audience. I should have a deaf actor to play Catherine. So I got in touch with Jenny Seeley from Grey Eye, and she said all the deaf actors she knew were too old for the role, but there's a new BA in acting for the D-Deaf performers at Glasgow and Royal Scottish Conservatoire. So I got in touch with them, and they sent me all the CVs of this year's graduates, and Bea Webster auditioned, and this is her first job. And audiences don't realise that she is actually deaf. She's not just signing. So we've broken a Brecht rule. The Brecht estate will probably send me a bill now for about 120 grand. But we've broken a rule because our Katrin does communicate, but she signs to the audience. And she's not interpreting the play. She's speaking to other characters. She's saying to the audience, what do I do? What do I do? My big brother's gone to war, all this kind of thing. And the deaf audience love it. She'll say quite offensive things about other characters, and you'll suddenly get a little group of people in the audience throwing their heads back and laughing, and nobody knows what they're laughing at. I'm loving that. I'm absolutely loving it. I think it's groundbreaking. I don't know. It's the first time in my 30-odd years of directing I've worked with a deaf actor, so I feel a bit ashamed of that. But I now feel, God, I don't know if I can go back to a non-accessible production after this. It feels really, like a forward step that you can't step back from. So that's exciting. And we've got an app that the company, oh dear, I've forgotten the name, how embarrassing. I think it's Talking Birds, they're called. They've developed this app called the Difference Engine, which means that the script is captioned on deaf and de-deaf audience members' smartphones or tablets.
Right.
So they've got the script scrolling automatically on their phones. They've got an interpreter within the show, and they've got a character who is doing all her communication in BSL on the stage. So, and the feedback we've had from that audience has been absolutely positive. They loved it, absolutely loved it, and really felt at last they were in a piece of theatre which they felt invited into. One deaf person said, I hate theatre because I hate foreign films and I hate reading subtitles. So theatre just does my head in. And they put the interpreter in a spotlight at the side of the stage, so I'm missing most of what's going on the stage anyway because I'm not looking at it. So she was delighted, and I think it fits the play. I think it fits the whole journey of the play and the narrative of the play that we've done that. I directed this play in 2000 at a drama school and walked away from it and thought, I've not done a very good job of that. And the students enjoyed it, but I looked at it and thought, I've really not scratched the surface on what Mother Courage is about. And I went away and thought, did a lot of reading. And the reason it's set in the 30 Years' War, even though it was written in 39, is because that was the last time that Brecht felt that was the end of medieval wars and the beginning of modern wars. And it's very interesting when you read research about the 30 Years' War. It begins in 1618, so that's interesting. Here we go, same number as us this year. And it begins with a very small religious conflict in Bohemia. And then it grows and grows and grows and grows and becomes basically the Lutherists of the Northern Europe trying to claw back Europe from the Holy Roman Empire. But Cardinal Richelieu of Catholic France decides to join forces with the Protestants. No interest in religion whatsoever, but very much interested in resources and land and wealth. And so you have the beginning of the capitalist approach to war. It's not about a religious ideology anymore. It's about greed. I mean, historians might shoot me down in flames, but for me, that was my hook. Yeah. That was my hook for this production, that we are for me, as an anti-capitalist, we are at the end of capitalism. People can shout me down about that as well. I've got good arguments for it. It's bust. My oldest son lives in Shanghai, and he goes, yep, Dad, I live in the most capitalist country in the world, and it is bust, and we are about to face horrendous changes in the next 50 years that could mean horrible conflicts. But there you go. We're at the end of capitalism, and the play is at the beginning of capitalism. And it's blatant. I mean, it's not very subtle. The Marxism drips out of this play, and so Tory voters coming to it might find it I don't know whether it depends if you know your Marx or not, really. But Brecht doesn't pull his punches. Every scene is a transaction and a series of business decisions, but somehow it doesn't repeat itself. You just go, oh, God. You watch this woman, Pauline and I were talking about it, you watch this woman make decisions based on business all the way through the play, and she fails every time. And it just drives her mad. She's almost like insane with being a failed businesswoman. That's why she's left all alone to pull her wagon and back towards the battlefield. And you ask yourself the question, what does make an extremely successful business person? And by and large, the really, really successful ones already inherited money from their families. You know, they haven't actually. Trump is one of the worst business people in the world, but he's placed himself on a pedestal as the best business person. Well, he's the best at everything, isn't he?
Yes.
So the play, for me, kind of points out, not only is it anti-war, but it says capitalism doesn't work. Profit doesn't work. If you have to exploit somebody, you failed. So being on the cusp of the medieval and the modern, I thought, well, what's medieval about theatre? Well, mask is medieval. And Russell Dean, who's, to me, the best mask maker in the whole country, I said, well, I think I want to do it in half mask and be very, almost pay lip service to commedia. Yeah. And Russell said, well, yes, but if it's immersive and the audience are literally feet away from those masks, then they will fail. So I thought, oh, yeah, that's the problem. We're not on a stage. You don't get that lovely distance. And he said, but it's very Brechtian to be able to see the elastic, and it's very Brechtian to see that they're not prosthetics. And I went, yeah, but the audience don't necessarily give a damn about that. The academics might do. So he came up with this brilliant idea, what he calls midmasks. And they're really just elaborate red noses. They're not red noses, but they're just noses with additional features like eyebrows or sometimes top lips and teeth. And there's something like Bruegel about them. They are grotesquely ugly, and they transform the actors instantly, which is great because we could only afford 9 actors, not 15, so we can double roll it. But they're instant, and they work with non-mask faces, because in this play, the non-mask faces are grotesque anyway. And they're not really, we haven't used makeup, they're just dirty down. They've got dirty faces, but they're not made up, so it's not Buffon in that way. But they really work. I mean, Pauline, when we introduced the masks, I remember her face fell, and I know what she was thinking as an actor. Oh, God, they're going to pull focus from me. I'm the lead. I've got to carry this play, and I'm going to have to battle with these huge characters. And I had to reassure her that it's down to the skill of the mask wearers, and they're all highly skilled, that they don't do that. They are grotesquely huge, but they don't dominate the stage. They fit in the stage. And her character is so vast that they are dominated by her anyway. But I find that really exciting because for me, this mix of the ancient, the Buffon, I love the Buffon. The Buffon were grotesque. They were anti-establishment. They put 2 fingers up to the king and the Pope, and they had good reason to. And if we can inject some of the angry anti-establishment Buffon into this, then it works. And again, there'll be experts out there who go, I'm afraid that's not Buffon, or I've written a book about it. Well, I'm not really an academic. I don't care. I know what I like to see on stage, and this kind of thing. I've seen, a number of years ago, I used to go to the Edinburgh Fringe, and there used to be these really exciting Polish or Russian or Romanian companies doing bonkers shows with masks and people on stilts and fire. And it's amazing. And it's a bit old hat now, actually, I'm afraid. It's kind of been done. But this, I just feel really pleased with this. And for me, at the end of the day, I have to put my head on my pillow and go, is it any good? And I enjoy watching it. You can be bashful and you can be modest as a director, but if you have a vision and it doesn't work, you've got to hold your hands up and go, didn't work, no, I'm sorry. But if you feel it does, then you fight your corner. I mean, there's been a review, there's been some great reviews of this play so far, but there's been a review by a reviewer who clearly doesn't like Promenade, wasn't comfortable standing up for a lot of the time, didn't enjoy it. And you go, well, fine, that's your viewpoint. But an awful lot of audience, well, actually, that was the only performance when we haven't had a standing ovation. We've had standing ovations every night. Because I think people have had an experience. They've not just sat comfortably in a velvet seat and seen a famous actor pulling a cart. They've been getting dirty with it.
I would want to pick up on a few of the things that you've said there. When, sometimes when you get a casting notice in, you look at it and you think, that's such an obvious choice. I'm surprised she's not been asked to play that part before. And I thought that when I saw Pauline McLynn, and I thought, she's a great choice. I haven't seen it, but I can just imagine her being brilliant in that role. A lot of people forget that the play is actually very funny. There's a lot of politics in there. And like you said, it's pure Marxism because he was steeped in Marx. He modified Marx's famous statement that the point is not just to understand society, it's to change it. And he said the same about theatre. Obviously, took the credit for that as well. What Pauline was saying about she wasn't bothered about what the critics said, I thought that was quite telling, because I know a lot of critics, and a lot of them are very down on Brecht, because I don't think, even the ones who've been reviewing for a long time, I don't think many of them have seen a production of Brecht that's done properly, because they're often very, well, there's not a great deal of fun in them. And Brecht himself said that, yeah, exactly, that's the word, yeah. And Brecht himself said, whatever the message, the first thing is to entertain. So I think you forget what Brecht was saying at your peril as a director, don't you?
Yes, totally. I feel sorry for Brecht. I think he shot his mouth off to a certain extent. He had all these theories that unfortunately I feel are badly taught at school level and possibly at university level. I mean, there are. I'm not an academic, but I am a theatre maker first and foremost. And you're right. I want people to come out of here having had, inverted commas, a good night out. But you can have a good night out having been to see a horror film. Yeah. You know, that's still a good night out. It doesn't have to be all very sanitized. And what I think Lee Hall has done is the first thing he did that I have completely run with is he has described the soldiers in the play as buffoons. They're like Dad's army. Yes. And the final scene is pure Dad's army. You almost expect Private Jones to come running in shouting, "Don't panic, don't panic!" And the officers are buffoons. They're like Captain Mannering, and that Dad's army quality that Lee Hall has really pulled out in his version I think it's very English. I think it's. I have German relatives, so I think I feel qualified to say that they do have a different sense of humour to us.
Yes, yeah.
And the reason Dad's army is run and run and run and run is because in the face of trauma, in the worst possible experiences, English people are stupid and funny and take the piss out of each other and take the mickey out of everything. Look at all the horrible jokes that come out every time something horrible happens in the world. They are English jokes. And I think that's what Hall has managed to do. I mean, I would love him to see this production. I haven't been in touch with him, but I would love him to, because I think I love what he's done with it. I think I failed the first time I directed this because I made it worthy, and God, it was dull. And there have been some really dull productions of this play, and friends of me have said, "Oh God, Rod, you didn't have the courage."
Yes.
Good luck, you know. And I think it's down to Pauline. Pauline drives it with a wryness and a twinkle, and you can't get that Irish brogue out of your head. She's changed the script in her way of delivering it. She hasn't changed a word, but she's Irished it up, you know, and it makes that lilt is so funny, but very, very modern as well. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've often read the script and laughed out loud at some of the scenes, but I don't think I've ever laughed out loud when I've been watching it on stage. It doesn't translate to stage, or it can do, but it often doesn't, does it?
Well, I think that's another reason why I'm pleased that I've gone for masks. Only the soldiers wear masks. I didn't say that. So all the soldiers are masked up, which means that in their pomposity, they're just ridiculous, particularly the senior soldiers, the generals and the colonels. It's like there's a cartoon character on the stage. And the costume designer, Sarah Perks, and Sarah Mills, her associate, have done a brilliant job of putting the soldiers into slightly ridiculous costumes, but not so ridiculous that you don't believe them.
Yeah.
They're rather like, Bruegel paintings is one thing I'm thinking. So you see the sort of warts and the gap tooth and things like that, but also like those Otto Dix paintings that were part of the Expressionist movement that came out of the First World War.
Yeah.
They're crude. That's the word, crude. And Sarah's really helped me with that. And her design is so simple and yet so effective. First of all, she's built me a wagon to die for. I mean, Pauline was skipping around. We went to the set builders and Pauline said, "Oh, let me have a go." And she was pulling it around the car park like a kid and skipping around the car park with his wagon attached to it. So, Sarah's design for me is, first of all, it made me a beautiful wagon and made Pauline a beautiful wagon to pull, cart, whatever you want to call it. But she's divided the space up beautifully with these Brechtian filthy curtains on high-tension wires, which is what actually Brecht did with several of his productions as an end-on. And the beauty of them is you can see shadows behind them. You can see characters walking past when they're lit. They don't hide backstage effectively. You can hear the crew moving benches. You can hear them resetting props. And so there is activity scuffing on around you. And I said to one of the audience members, did that pull focus? Did that spoil your experience? Oh, no, she said, no. I felt like I was in the technology of theatre. And there was a little old lady who, because you move with the scenes, she couldn't find an end-on position to watch the scene, so she watched it from the side. And I said, are you all watching it from here? She said, it's so exciting. I'm in the wings. And, so you're giving them this kind of meta-theatre experience as well, which I'm loving. The audience seem to be really responding to, know. It's a risk. There will be some audiences that absolutely hate the experience, but, you can't mitigate for that.
No,
you just got to
win them all.
You can't win them all. Absolutely.
Yeah. Apart from the humour, though, you said before about how Brecht is taught. Another thing that Brecht himself said was, you shouldn't start my work from the theory. You should start by looking at the play, watching the plays, and then you go to the theory to see what I was trying to do and how I did it. And somebody who studied from the theory will probably be surprised by the ending, which a lot of people think that Brecht didn't do emotion, but it's a devastating ending, isn't it? Yes,
it's devastating, and audiences do cry, and they come up to me and go, sorry, I cried, Brecht wouldn't like that. And I go, he's dead anyway. Get on with it. The ending is moving. The way Lee Hall has written the ending is genius, because it's Dad's army, Dad's army, Dad's army, ouch.
Yeah.
You get... So what he does, have you seen that cartoon of Batman slapping Robin across the face, which is a bit of a meme that's going around?
Yeah.
And it's a backhanded slap. It's like Brecht does that to the audience.
Yes.
He goes, look at this is funny, this is funny, this is funny. Bang, what are you laughing for? That's disgusting, you shouldn't be laughing.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. I love that. That. If we can push that to the nth degree, we will. And that again might be, some Brecht academics will go, oh, no, you were almost taking it to pantomime levels. You mustn't do that. Well, I think you can be almost disrespectful with Brecht. And he's probably looking down on me now, and either I can smell his cigar smoke as he blows it into me. He either loves that or hates that. But the same with all his plays.
Yeah.
You either love or hate them, or you do both. It's yes and no is what he said.
Yeah, but he doesn't just do the emotional ending, though. He puts the capper on the end of it. You get the non-reaction from Mother Courage to the terrible thing that we've just seen, don't we?
Yes, yeah. And I've seen some Mother Courages put far too much emotion into that moment, and that's, I think, what some critics want, and Pauline refuses.
Yes.
I don't want to spoil the ending too much, but she refuses anyway.
Yeah. You are known, obviously, as a political theatre company, and you said before it's your 50th anniversary, and this is a massive production, which is right for an anniversary, obviously.
Yes.
But it's on a scale that's very different to anything else, but it's the first Brecht that you've done, isn't it?
Yes. We've for 50 years mostly worked with new writing, and finding writers who want to capture the struggle of working class people. We had a big chunk of our existence from 1986 to 2006, which was before my time. I started in 2006, where the work focused very much on teenagers. So Rachel Felberg, Kulu Tiari and Wendy Harris, their work really was high-quality theatre for, by and large, youth clubs. When I took over, I said, I'm really not interested in that. I can't stand teenagers. Because they'll sit there and they have no idea of the quality they're watching. They really want to play table tennis. You've come into their youth club and they were hoping to chat somebody up that night, and you've turned up and ruined their night for them. I mean, that's a huge generalisation, sorry. I don't mean that really. I don't want to make theatre that ghettoises audiences. I want teenagers to come and see this and come and see Red Ladder's work with their grandparents and then have a good old political argument on the way home, like I used to have with my dad. That's what I think is important. And if you make work specifically for an age group, it's very difficult to do anything but marginalise them, really. There will be theatre makers out there screaming abuse at this and going, that's rubbish. Yeah, of course, there are some brilliant companies, and Wendy and Rachel did really high-quality work with teenagers, but it's just not what I'm interested in, that's the thing. So I made that obvious at my interview, and I think the Arts Council person who interviewed me thought I was wrong for the company, but the company were ready for us to go back to our sort of political roots. It's very tricky, though, isn't it? Because good political theatre shouldn't be so obviously political that it's haranguing you. Brecht does harangue to a certain extent. Yeah. Where Boff Worley's plays in the past for us have been brilliant is that they are not fist-pumping, donkey jacket-wearing, socialist worker party-selling plays. They're plays about ordinary working-class people and how tough it is to live through the miners' strike, or how tough it is to live in poverty. So with this kind of next phase of work, we came out of the national portfolio from 14 to 18, and we're back now. And what I've said to the Arts Council is we want to make work which is more and more and more about the contemporary experience of the working class, whatever the working class means. So we want to do a play. We're doing a play written by Nick Ahad about wrestling, but it's about a Syrian young man who's come to this country and is a brilliant wrestler, an Afro-Caribbean squaddie who wants to get his anger out in wrestling, and the third character is a British East Asian. So it's a kind of post-Brexit comedy about what it is to be second, third, or even fourth generation British BAME, and using wrestling as a sort of metaphor for that. So this is a classic, and what I'm saying is that next play is more typical of our Red Ladder work. Yeah. This, a classic, is something I don't think we've ever done. I think an Ernst Toller play was done in the 70s, but I think it was a bit of a turkey. But I apologise to those people listening who were involved in that production, but I have not seen any evidence of it doing particularly well. So I think we did an Ernst Toller, but that's the only one I can think of in the past. This really is a bold decision to do something different. You can't do a 50th anniversary play and just do the same as you've always done. No. You've got to bring people in. And also it's an opportunity to bring in new audiences. So we're having coach loads of schools coming to see this. Okay, here I am contradicting myself. I don't want to make work for teenagers. And we're getting coach loads of teenagers to see it, but that's different. They're going to come to see it because I hope they're going to learn from it. And, you want them to become fans of the company. Well, I don't know, maybe they will. We go back after this. We go back to the sort of Red Ladder typical work. But for 50 years, from 68 to 2018, the thread that runs through all the work is telling the story of people whose stories don't normally get told. As Brecht said, when you read the history books, they're about the kings and the queens and the leaders of men, but not about the people who actually built the Great Wall of China, who actually built the spires and cathedrals. And I think that's what Red Ladder is always trying to do, is whether they're teenage stories or old people stories or whatever, they're the stories of people who won't get into the history books. They won't necessarily be famous, but they are part of the fabric of this society. And, we taught a beautiful musical about three sisters in the miners' strike, which was commissioned by the Unite the Union. And I worried about it being commissioned by Unite the Union because I didn't want Red Ladder to be just pigeonholed as old lefty in that way. But they wanted it, and they gave us a fair bit of money, so we couldn't turn it down. But what Boff wrote was about three sisters who couldn't stand each other at the beginning of the year, but after the end of the year, fighting together in the strike and keeping the community together, they became closer than ever. And that kind of beautiful message about unity, when we took it to Hemsworth Pit Club, who had lived through the strike, and they were reluctantly coming in to see this play because they were like, oh, what do you know about the miners' strike? We lived it. There were tears rolling down cheeks in a sentimental way, yeah, but they were saying things like, in the miners' strike, we lost, but as a community, we were solid. Yeah. And we would burn off our fences. One guy said we actually pulled down our garden fences to make firewood because we were being starved by the state and we were being controlled by the state and we were unified. But he said, now we're more disparate and there's more discord in our community than ever before.
Yeah.
And he said, it's tragic. You know, people hate their Polish neighbours. They hate this, that, and the other. They argue with each other. They're competing. And they're more sucked into materialism than ever before because they're so miserable. And he said the strike was one time when we were solid as a community. And the play did that. Boff wrote an absolutely gorgeous song called This Is War. And it was sang at the fish counter of the local supermarket. And the women were singing about the Monday after Orgreave and the horror of being battered by the police and charged at by the horses, and the way the BBC completely misreported that.
Yeah.
And there was a lovely line in the song, which is basically, sometimes you watch the news, but when you are the news, you realise the news is not the news. Something like that.
Yes.
And it was remarkable. And it got a standing ovation from a massive audience at the Durham Miners Gala. It was one of those moments that sent a shiver down my spine. And then last year we did, in this warehouse, we did a stage version of The Shed Crew, which is a book about a real group of feral teenagers in the 90s who lived in a garden shed and were heroin addicts and whatever. The real Shed Crew came to see it, and I was terrified that we were going to, insult them and not show enough respect. And the leading character had only died of bad heroin 4 months before, so we rewrote the play so it was a tribute to him. And they came and they came and they came again and they came again because they used it to deal with their grief. And the lighting designer who works with us, Tim Skelly, an old friend of mine, worked with me for 20-odd years, he said that moment when they came and that moment when the miners stood up and gave a standing ovation in the middle of the play after that song about Orgreave, he said, that's what Red Ladder's about. Shivers down the spine when the people whose story you're telling feel honoured. And I'm going to brag about that. I'm really proud about that. I think that's what we do well. A close friend of mine who's a producer, now a theatre producer, she actually dated the guy who was the lead character of The Shed Crew. He did a bit of work backstage at the Playhouse, and she was weeping, but she said no other company could have done that play than Red Ladder. Nobody else. And you did it in a warehouse for a reason. Yeah, the reason we did that production in the warehouse was so that people walked alongside those characters and understood their poverty and understood why heroin was the only way out. And it is still the only way out because some of them are still ill with that addiction. So for me, again, it's a departure to do a classic. How do we make people feel that we're telling their story even though we're watching a classic? That's an ambition. I might have failed at that. I mean, this review that didn't particularly like the show said that was an ambition that failed. Fair enough. As a gay, you can't win them all.
Yeah, you have to dwell on the bad reviews, though, don't you?
Well, I think you have to take a bad review because it's a perspective.
Yeah.
If there's 110 people watching this show, that's about the maximum, I'm afraid, then there's 110 different shows being interpreted.
Yeah.
Because everybody's brain reads it in a different way, and they're seeing it from a different point of view all over the warehouse. I can't mitigate against that. If I were to try, I would be a fool. Yes, it hurts a bit because you love the actors who are working so hard for you, so it hurts a bit when their work is criticised, and it hurts me a little bit as well. But I've got to take that on the chin and go, well, why else are you doing this? Yeah. You know, you're exposing your work every single night to the public. Go and fill shelves on Sainsbury's if you don't want to put up with that. So get over it, Dixon, and yeah. And sometimes when we did The Damned United, it got some brilliant reviews, but Michael Billington said he loved it, but it wasn't really one for him because he's not a football fan. And we tried our hardest to make the play not just about football, but about male relationships. But it's a play about football. And most of the people who come and see it are Leeds fans or Derby fans or whatever. So, again, I have to get over myself and go, well, Billington was right, really. It probably is one for the fans. But the point about it is that when it came to Plymouth Theatre Royal, there were more Plymouth Argyle fans sitting in the audience than had ever been into that theatre. I know, because I know people who work in that theatre. So sometimes you have to do a niche play. and that has to be recognised.
So at the moment, you've got Mother Courage running, you've got Damned United on tour. So what else have you got with the company?
We've got Wrong'un still touring. It's been touring for 6 years. It's a one-woman musical, a cappella musical about a suffragette that Boff wrote us. He wrote it for my wife, and she performed it about 80-odd times and then just couldn't bear it any longer. And Kat Ure, who is Yvette in this production, she plays Annie Wilde in that, and it's got some of those gigs. We've got Playing the Joker, which is a rugby league play, which has Jamie Jones Buchanan from the Leeds Rhinos in it. It's a comedy about Eddie Waring. That goes to rugby league clubs. We have this circuit, you see, the Red Ladder Local Circuit, which is a non-theatre circuit that goes to rugby league clubs and working men's clubs. And we're starting to put other companies' work on it. So Freedom Studios play When We Were Brothers. That's going on that circuit. And Levi Payne, who is A-list, is in that. So there's some lovely crossovers. Doncaster Cast have made a piece of work written by Gary Lyons called The Last Scene, which is about the last coal mine that was closed, and Verbatim Play. And Jamie Smelt, who is a Red Ladder Company member and was in Damned United, he's in that, as is David Chafer, who's Peter Taylor in Damned United, he's in that. And Emma Tugman, who's been in Red Ladder shows, she's in that. So there's quite... we seem to be suddenly providing the local theatre ecology with quite a lot of touring opportunities and work for actors, so I'm quite chuffed about that as well. Yeah, then we're preparing this co-production with Lancaster Dukes about wrestling, and then I'm really excited about 2020. Cora Bissett, who is a remarkable theatre maker, performer, musician, director, writer, deviser, she wants to work with us in 2020, and we want to do a piece which will support research at Bristol University and Leeds University into poverty and the poverty trap and how to change policy through that research. And so we don't want to make a piece of poverty porn. Cora and I want to use her musical skills and make a musical that is about the dignity of poverty, the fact that people who have 3 jobs in order to take their kids to Corfu for a holiday, that is not a bad thing. It is a bad thing they have to have, but it's actually what you get from the Tories is they roll their eyes and they go, cool, they complain about poverty, but they go to Corfu for their holidays. Why the hell shouldn't they? They live in the 21st century. That kind of thing should not be just for the privileged. But some of those families also need food banks. And again, the Tory response is, they need food banks, but they go to Corfu for their holidays. It's this culture of, if you're poor, you have to tug your forelock. That's what I want to attack. To be poor is a bad thing, but it's a trap that capitalism forces you into. So in order to survive capitalism, sometimes you have to work practically to death, So that's the story that I want to explore. And Cora did a piece about sex trafficking about 2006, I think it was, which was set in a flat, immersively, and used a council flat. And that changed policy about the rights that women have who have been sex trafficked out of Eastern Europe, that rather than just being deported, where they would be sent back to danger, they are allowed to stay and claim benefits until they can get citizenship here. Cora's play, that changed policy. So she and I sat and I said, how can we do this about poverty and work together? I'd like to set it immersively in a council flat, but let's do it with music. And so the people who live in that council flat can come and see it, and it's about them and it's in their environment. So that's early days. The universities are very interested, but they have to wait and see what funding they can pull down for it. But it's something that I think we want to fund anyway for ourselves and try and develop it and then maybe make it grow even more if it's going to be useful. But Cora is going to be a collaborator on it, so really excited about that. But that'll be in a couple of years' time.
And that brings us right back to Brecht's statement that the point is not just to observe society, but it's to change it.
Yes, totally. And unfortunately, he says hit it with a hammer. And he isn't very subtle. No. But sometimes you do have to kick something in order to make it work. Yeah. And I think that for me, I would be disappointed with my work if there weren't people who were angered by it. We made a piece of work called Ugly in 2010, which I still think is one of our most interesting pieces of work, and it infuriated some people. It was about how ugly it's going to get once the climate is broken. So it wasn't about climate change. It was about once the Earth's thermostat is bust, what's going to happen. And it was a pretty dark world. Emma Adams wrote it. She's a genius of a writer. But she got a lot of personal abuse from people over that play. And I got some really long emails saying, it's really arrogant of you to tell this story now. But unfortunately, one of the things she wrote about were people crossing the Mediterranean from sub-Saharan Africa to get out of the heat. And they were being machine gunned on the beaches. And people saying, that's ridiculous, that will never happen. Well, it was pretty prescient, you know. Yeah. Emma's a genius, and I would love to perhaps remake that show one day. I've talked about that a lot. And the actors who were in it, Jo Mosley is one, actually. She's part of the ensemble at the Playhouse. She's often said, I would love another crack at Ugly. I think what Emma's written is genius, and it will upset people. So, yeah, maybe one day.
That was director Rod Dixon of Red Ladder Theatre Company talking about Mother Courage and Her Children by Bertolt Brecht, adapted by Lee Hall, which opened at the Albion Electric Warehouse in Leeds on the 28th of September 2018 and runs until the 20th of October. For more information, see www.redladder.co.uk.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.